Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad that you're here for another adventure of the Gloucester Bookies. Today is a special, an interview with, I'm going to call him the man behind, the man at the wheel. Jim Clark, who has made a presentation already at the Sawyer Library to acclaim, the packed house, reservations only, standing room only, and he delivered such a topic. I wanted him to come on the air, and he's kindly agreed. He's come by with some photos and things to show as well. But welcome to you. Welcome to our show, Jim Clark.
Thank you very much. So pleasure to find other people interested in Leonard Krask, who seems to have been somewhat forgotten in Gloucester.
Forgotten indeed. The fact is that we almost all, probably when we're 5 years old or less, know about and have seen and can identify and probably use the verbalization, man at the wheel. We know about that statue down the boulevard. And it's equal. Gloucester, man at the wheel. Man at the wheel equals Gloucester. Very, very, very typically. In fact, when the Gloucester 400 came, there was a desire, rightly, to put a book together on the 400th anniversary of the European settlement of Gloucester. And look at the cover, may I say. We find the man at the wheel. And if you look inside the book, my guest being Jim Clark, if you look inside the book, page 121, there is an article by Jim Clark, Remembering Leonard Krask. And there's a whole bunch of story and facts that he's researched and put together for us, that if you have a copy at home, and many of you do, of the Our People, Our Stories, then you'll find Jim Clark's article with pictures that you can look at after this show. Now, I invite, however, pay attention that Jim Clark, how did you get interested in this otherwise obscure man, Leonard Krask?
Oh, it started when I became interested in an Irish man from 100 years ago named Tom Crean, who went south to the Antarctic back during heroic age. He went south twice with Scott and then was with Shackleton on the Endurance cruise. He had an amazing life, many brushes with death, and he came back, retired to his hometown of Annisquil, Ireland, and opened the South Pole Inn, which is still in existence. A few years ago, I read about him, his amazing life, and then there was a hike in his honor. 20 miles over the mountain, starts up Mount Brandon and goes across the Annisquil Peninsula. And I said,
not in the Antarctic, but in
Ireland. In Ireland, ending at the South Pole Pub. So I said I would like to do that. Sounded like an adventure. And I went over to Ireland. During that hike, I met an Irish postman. We became friends. He took me to Tom Crean's grave. And at that point, I mentioned in Gloucester, there's a man perhaps with equal indomitable endurance to Tom Crean, that being Howard Blackburn. I came back after the hike. I went to the Cape Ann Museum to photograph Blackburn's vessel that's on display there. And then I went into the library records and found out that there was a sculpture called Memorial to Howard Blackburn. It had been damaged, was not on display. And I said, and this was 2 years ago, I said, my goodness, wouldn't it be something if this could be restored for the Gloucester 400 anniversary? After a little bit of experience with the museum, they allowed it to be restored, and I can show you a video of that restoration, which might be of interest.
like to do that, but recapping. There's like a pinball of fortuitous events. You're interested in Antarctic explorer, your trip to Ireland, your discussion about Howard Blackburn, coming back to Gloucester and finding that there's a sculpture, a damaged sculpture by Leonard Krask in storage, and your immediate response to try to get this statue, I'm going to call it a statue, it's really a marquette. I found out what a marquette is. Maybe you tell us quickly.
That's just a model.
A model.
A model.
A three-dimensional model that sculptors use in miniature of what they intend as a statue. And this existed and still exists in the Cape Ann Museum. But it's damaged, or originally was damaged, until you showed up with the question, can't this be restored? And there's a video. Who made this video?
This was done by the nephew of the restorer. His name is Alex Schur. The sculpture gallery is the Caproni Gallery. Robert Schur is the senior principal there. And that same gallery worked with Leonard Krask 100 years ago and made the mold for the Fisherman's Memorial, the man at the wheel.
Beautiful. Now, please, if you have this video, and folks at home, I think you're going to be amazed by what you see. It's gratifying to me to see that history was restored a large part from Jim Clark. Please.
I think the working nature of Cape Ann makes it a distinctly American place. There's a grit to the city, and that has attracted intrepid explorers such as Howard Blackburn, who survived 5 days lost at sea and returned to Gloucester, where he received a hero's welcome, and artists like Leonard Krask.
Krask was a local artist in the Gloucester community, and he created one of the most iconic American sculptures. The Fisherman's Memorial is really his signature piece.
The fishing industry is part and parcel of who we are as a community. It's so important to our cultural identity.
You look at the expression, the face of the fisherman, it's so emotional.
Fishermen risk so much just to survive. You stand in front of that sculpture with your back to the ocean and take in the names of the fishermen that have lost their lives. You feel the weight of responsibility and the man at the wheel.
In the Cape Ann Museum's collection, there's a small maquette, also by Krask. This is the memorial to Howard Blackburn.
The piece represents that moment in 1883 where Blackburn lost his main ship at sea. He knew that his hands were going to freeze, but he froze them in a position so they could at least hold the oars. He managed to save his own life. It's this scene of tremendous endurance. A maquette is a sculptor's way of modeling an idea.
It's a three-dimensional sketch. Krask made that model in clay, then worked with one of my predecessors at the studio, a great master mold maker, Pietro Caproni. Their intention was to make it into a heroic-sized figure.
It was developed to be scaled up, like the Fisherman's Memorial in bronze. Because of its condition, this wonderful work of art has unfortunately been relegated to storage.
We're honored to be able to restore his original maquette. The conservation is a very specialized type of work. The most important thing is to use all the original parts in the conservation. That's what we try to preserve. But the oarsman is missing one arm and a hand, and some pieces we'll have to tediously put back together by looking at a historic picture of the complete first-generation cast. The strength of the piece is in its motion and the rendering of the water. You get the sense that the oarsman is captured in a big wave. It's a whole story, just totally iconic.
Through artists such as Leonard Krask, we can provide a look back.
Pieces like this are a reflection of our community.
We want to continue to illuminate and engage people in the stories of this place, of people who made a real difference in this community, and the role that it has played in changing the course of American history.
May I say that
It seemed like a wonderful idea that it could be restored. And then it turned out that there really was not much known about Leonard Krask. If you Googled him 2 years ago, I would have said he had done the Fisherman's Memorial, perhaps one or two other things, and the entire rest of his life had been lost.
Was a blank, yes, a blank page. And your article in this Gloucester 400 publication is illuminating in a way that hasn't been known for close to 100 years. That people it just didn't. Back then, they knew Leonard Krask because he lived in Gloucester, and they knew Leonard Krask because, as you saw in a newsreel clipping, he was at the dedication of his sculpture to the Fisherman Memorial, and he was around town, and he was engaged in projects. So this was just a next door neighbor that you knew and some background. He would, I'm sure, be approachable and talk to you. But that's, then, after, when did he die, 1950?
1950.
He died in 1950. So it's been over almost 75 years since anybody's been able to speak with him or know about him, except people like you, Jim Clark, examining, exploring, inspecting, making note of, taking photos, and other museums you visited outside of Gloucester, because the sculptors aren't all in Gloucester here.
There's dozens and dozens of sculptures around, principally in the New England area, and I'm sure there's some yet that I've yet to find that are undiscovered.
May I say out there, people in Gloucester or the Cape Ann area may know more than we do about the whereabouts of sculptures, statues by Leonard Krask that have yet to be cataloged. There's no, what do they call those? Raison catalog. The catalogs have not been done for Leonard Krask. And on a basis of exploring, the number one explorer in the world is Jim Clark, and he hasn't found them all. If you know of somebody or know somebody who knows, let us know at 1623 about whereabouts of sculptures by, statues by Leonard Krask. I'm talking, as up till this minute, about a sculptor. But you've explored and found out that Leonard Krask was not all of his life a sculptor. And I'd like you to tell us, and you can use images as it goes. Tell us about his life outside of and besides being a sculptor.
Well, he was born in England, 1878, and he started out, went to what we would call private high school, and was a brilliant student. He won dozen awards for drawing, for science, for elocution, innumerable awards, and then he was headed to become a medical student. Went to medical school, received a scholarship, started medical school, and was a teaching assistant, medical research assistant. And then about the year 1900, he completely changed his career, which would probably be shocking even in modern times. He decided he wanted to become a professional actor. And indeed, he became a professional actor for approximately the next 20 years. Starting in England, he worked with many of the well-known actors of that day on the stage in England. And also, as somewhat of a hobby then, he was a developing photographer. He had his own darkroom early on, back 1900, when developing photographic prints was quite a technical feat. And that is something that has matured in his life later on. But he stayed in England until about 1910, at which point there were a fascination in the United States and Canada with British aristocracy and so forth. And there was touring companies that came over from England to perform plays in the United States, also in Canada, and Leonard Krask was amongst these. He came to the United States, let me see, I believe it was 1910, 1911, 1912, and he would go back to Britain for part of the year, come over for the rest of the year with a touring company.
I should interrupt for this reason. People would like to know the context. 1900 up till roughly 1920, anybody who's acting in that era in England or the United States, 1910, 1920, was going to begin on stage. And gradually, there was going to be a thing called motion pictures, moving pictures. And I'm doing this gesture because a lot of the initial cameramen had to have an arm. It wasn't automatic or a machine. It was their arm taking the pictures as they looked through a lens. But in any case, did Leonard Krask make the move between on stage, touring companies, and Hollywood, or I'm going to call it Hollywood, moving pictures?
Yes, he did. He
Tell us more.
made 3 early moving pictures that I found titles to.
Silent movies.
These are silent movies. 1915. He had come to the United States first to New York, and that was a center of video or film production at the time. And Gaumont, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Productions, a company that's still in business, although they're based in France, had a division in the United States, and he made 3 movies. The Ace of Death, the New Adam and Eve, and one other one that with an equally dramatic title that I can't remember the title of it.
That's true. They don't sound like comedies. All right. But have you got any pictures of him as an actor? If you have a chance to.
Yes, I do.
Help us with that.
Let me see if I can bring it up.
I believe that works. Tell us what you see up here.
Well, I don't have any pictures of him as an actor in England. When he came to the United States, as I mentioned first, he was in New York, and they were doing a variety of touring companies, and that's when he did the 3 movies in 1915, 1916. Then he came to Boston, and there was the Henry Jewett Players was a repertory company that established themselves at the Copley Theater, and these are images of Leonard Krask when he was at the Copley in a variety of plays. And he worked at the Copley from 1915 on till 1920, when he decided he would have another change of careers, and he became a sculptor at that point.
1915, 1916. Before the United States was involved in World War I, it looks like he was portraying himself as a soldier, obviously a soldier from the British Army, in the second of these images. Is that him in
Yes.
the uniform?
That is correct.
He never was actually a soldier, was he?
No, he was not.
But he, even in the war, even in World War I, he
Correct.
was in uniform only on stage. But he did have these publicity articles on his arrival in the Copley Theater. Now, would you generally say he made a living at it, or he was spectacular, he was a hit, or what?
I can only judge his theatrical career by reading newspaper clippings, and he became a very well-known actor, at least at the Copley in New England.
So in demand in the sense of the public liked him, and he even in demand for this Gaumont film company to be in 3 movies.
3 movies.
And that was may I say, was that? Did he then turn into an artist, or what was that situation?
Well, I guess you would say he was a developing artist throughout this period, because while he was at the Copley, as a hobby, if you will, he would do photographs of the various players, and those would be posted in the lobby. And then he did small models, sculptured portrait busts of some of the players, which would be displayed at the Copley. Also now, it's important to remember when he was an actor in the movies, these three movies, there were three real spectaculars, as they were titled at the time. He was also watching the production process, because later in his career, he made his own movies. He did movies of the famous fishermen's races in Gloucester and so forth, and those were skills he learned back in 1915 or so.
So in what we would call the Roaring '20s, at least initially, he was juggling, I guess, one career and two hobbies. He was an actor, he was a photographer, and he was also an artist or a sculptor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess you would say he made dramatic changes in his life when he became, in 1920, he left Copley Theater and he became a sculptor. He then, in the Boston City Register directory, he was listed as a sculptor. That was his occupation, and he did not go back to acting.
Do you have any images of the early days of his sculpting?
Well,
I'd like to see anything that you have on that.
The earliest record we have is in about 1914. He displayed a portrait bust of his father at the British Academy of Arts. So this was on display along with the other principal sculptures of the time. I have no record of that. There's no photograph that I've been able to recover of that. But we have one other early image here.
You've got to help us and guess what, I know it's a guess, what year. There's a year on it.
That's a good guess. 1913, he did this portrait bust of his niece, niece Betty, if you will, that still exists and is a family heirloom. Now I've been in touch with the family descendants, and you can see that it's much more than an amateur endeavor. And indeed, the portrait bust of his father was on display at the National Academy in London.
It looks like in this instance, the model, the little girl, and the bust and the sculptor, Leonard Krask, are all together in this picture. Yes, in 1913. Tell me if you know, well, you just referred to it. The descendants cooperated with you. You what was it, correspondence or on the phone? How did you get in touch with them?
Well, I was very fortunate. I went online and was able to track down his grandnephew, Stephen Batchelor, and there's another David Batchelor, his brother. David is in London and is an abstract sculptor now. Does a variety of things. Maybe he has Leonard Krask genes, but they're entirely different. And the other grandnephew, Stephen Batchelor, is an expert on Buddhist theology. In
this country or overseas?
He lived in England most of his life. He now lives in France, and he has some of Leonard Krask's sculptures that have been passed down.
These multiple sculptures that he has, have you had a chance to see images of it, photos of it, or in what manner you're?
Well, I can show you one here. This image will come up in a moment. These two are with family in England. These were early sculptures of him. I don't know the titles of those.
So you might call these in a private collection. They're not on
Yes.
display.
It was
The
a
only-
private collection.
The only way we know about these sculptures, is from your pictures here. They're
Yes.
not on display in a museum or anything else. Okay.
I can show you one other interesting sculpture here coming up. This is called The Joy of Life. It was done in 1919. You can see on the left, Leonard Krask is doing the model of it, maquette. It is then in the very center, hard to see in the large image, but he made one that was 11 foot tall that was at the Hoffman Estate in Peterborough, New Hampshire.
Is this photo is from Peterborough, New Hampshire?
That is from Peterborough, New Hampshire. That sculpture is now in Tacoma, New York, and I can.
But you saw it in New Hampshire and
No.
took a photo? Or
No,
no. This is someone else's photo.
That was in New Hampshire. That estate has been demolished, and I tracked down the sculpture. Now it's in Tacoma, New York.
And there it is.
And there it is.
Now this is the same sculpture from different angles. Same
Yes,
sculpture
this is
from
the
different
same
angles.
sculpture. It's
What did you call it?
It's called Joy of Life.
All
It's
right.
one of his most famous sculptures, one of his early works that it predates the Fisherman's Memorial, but
So-
that is one that became very popular, and there's a number of smaller 3 foot high bronzes available. One is owned by Stephen Batchelor, his grandnephew.
The Joy of Life.
Joy of Life.
And this is from the early 1920s.
I believe it was the model was made in 1919, and then by 1920 it was cast.
But still around, and in fact in New York, in someone's estate.
Yes,
And did you visit it?
I did.
You saw this, so these photos are yours.
yes, that's correct.
All right. Congratulations. I mean, it's not easy automatic that you're going to find a sculpture statue. And didn't you discover one in New Hampshire in a museum? Tell us about that.
Oh yes, with Gloucester 400, Terry Weber, we went to New Hampshire. I'll show you pictures of that as well. We went to New Hampshire.
Let me people know, but Terry Weber is the editor, the wonderful, extraordinary editor and writer of responsible for this 400 stories project for the book that I displayed to you. You and Terry were up in New Hampshire.
And we were going to see at the Cathedral of the Pines a Leonard Krask sculpture, a small one that's called Ecce Homo. So we went there to visit that, and it turned out that we certainly saw that and were treated very kindly by the staff there. But we also found another Leonard Krask sculpture there that is called the Doughboy. And this doughboy in there is
Now,
a small doughboy,
You have, that's you and
Terry Weber.
and in between is a sculpture by
Leonard Krask, that
Leonard
is a
Krask.
small doughboy.
Doughboy.
They did not realize that it was by Leonard Krask, but the larger one is the Amesbury War Memorial now in Amesbury, Massachusetts.
So this is an equivalent of a Marquette.
Well, that's a bronze, so that is a small. It's not a model. It's a
Statue
small
in its
bronze.
statue in its own, right?
Yes,
But not as big as the one in Amesbury, which looks like this.
exactly like that.
Doughboy is the people know the World War I soldier, and this particular one, that size, is in the Cathedral of the Pines Museum,
In the Cathedral of the Pines Museum.
and they must have known the Ecce Homo, the Behold the Man, Doughboy at the foot of the cross was by Crask.
They knew that was by
but
Crask.
they didn't know this Doughboy was by Crask.
That is
until
correct.
you told them.
I looked at it and said, my gosh, it looks exactly like Amesbury War Memorial. And then indeed, I saw the Leonard Crask signature on it.
There it is.
And this is Amesbury.
Got to tell you, this is taking things out of turn, but I'm amused by it. You told the story, and it electrified us at the library when you told it. I'd like people to know. I'm sitting with a person who is unique in the sense that how many people do you know have ever climbed up on top of the man at the wheel and been on that statue legally? In fact, you had a police escort, I think. Tell us about the situation and what you discovered on the statue,
well,
the man at the wheel.
There's some very, very interesting.
Well, tell us before you get into the interesting discovery, how you came about to be on that statue and what you did.
Well, I was looking for. There was supposedly in my research, I found there was supposedly a secret inscription written on the top of the wheelhouse housing. Now, I did not know for sure that it existed. And it was very interesting to me because the inscription, which is shown here, says, "This being a place no one can see, it was modeled by Jimmy instead of by me." And then it has the Leonard Crask logo, if you will. And what that meant, and indeed we verified that it was there by climbing up on the statue. And
you had permission, but
we had permission. We had a police detail, and we went up. And on the left, you can see a very poor image. On the right is the enhanced image. I would like to go back again with proper permission and take a photograph with very low light. It was hard to see that inscription, and then it was in the morning, and then suddenly the clouds parted, and with very low light, I could see it, but I didn't have the camera with me at that time, so we're showing you the enhanced one. But that really shows something of Leonard Crask's personality, because Jimmy was apparently a young man who was his assistant during the modeling of this man at the wheel, and he wanted to be a sculptor. And this was a kindness by Leonard Crask that he let Jimmy do this part of what has become his iconic sculpture. I would love to find if anyone in Gloucester knows of a young man who would have been, we'll say, a teenager in 1920 to 1923, 1924, working with Leonard Crask. I would love to track him down.
If we can have Jimmy and his last name and who it really was, it would be a discovery on top of a discovery. I've got to ask you now, in terms of the other pictures of the man at the wheel, I think you've got I wonder what else you've discovered, happened upon in your research that you want to show us photos of.
Well, we've only touched on what the beginning of Leonard Crask's life. And I guess it's amazing the way he dealt with the adversity of the Great Depression. He had just done The Joy of Life. The Fisherman's Memorial was unveiled, and he became quite famous, and deservedly so, because of those sculptures. He was then commissioned in a little bit later to do another sculpture, which you'll see now, the George Washington DeLong sculpture. George Washington DeLong went to the Arctic, not the Antarctic, went north through the Bering Strait back in the 1880s or so on a vessel called the Jeannette. Frozen in ice, most of the people perished, including DeLong. His wife wanted a memorial done of him. and he saw the Fisherman's Memorial when it was unveiled in 1925, and immediately said, "That is the man I want to do the memorial to my husband." He got in touch with Leonard Krask. I've reviewed their correspondence, which went on, and he designed this.
Where is their correspondence? How did you?
That's in the letters are in the Smithsonian Archive.
Jeez. So the Smithsonian Archives are in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I don't know if you went to Washington or you got that on digital.
That was
computer.
digital, but I've been to Washington to look for things as well.
And you've read the letters between George Washington DeLong's widow and Leonard Krask back and forth on this sculpture that we're looking at right now.
And
where is this actual
this
statue?
is in Bronx, New York.
Okay.
He died in the Arctic. He and a large number of his crew were reinterred at the George Washington DeLong area here in Bronx, New York. There's also
So essentially, this stands in a sort of a cemetery.
It is in a cemetery, yes.
Yeah.
And that's at his gravesite. And when that was unveiled in 1928, his widow was there, and there was one survivor of the expedition that was there. And he said, "My gosh, that's exactly like George Washington DeLong looked, with his hand over his eye as he was trying to peer into the Arctic haze, if you will."
Sure.
And the way that Leonard Krask came up with that is basically he went out in a snowstorm with a driving wind and said, "How can I see where I'm going?" He tried various poses and said that is what appeared to be the best way to peer ahead. And he made the sculpture that way. And then when it was unveiled, a survivor said that is an accurate representation of the way Washington DeLong looked in the Arctic.
I'm just fascinated. That's a story and a half. The sculpture reenacts on a miniature basis. He's not in the Antarctic, but in a snowstorm.
In a snowstorm.
Says, "How do I get around to see?" And he discovers this pose, not from a photograph, not from a movie, or even any diary or description, but because he was there in a storm. And then the survivor vouches for it, validates that that's an accurate
Correct.
image.
And
Fantastic.
Krask was meticulous in the way he did things like that. There are, well, if you look at the Doughboy statue,
Yes.
for example, that you've just seen, when that was being made, he wasn't quite satisfied with the way that the first men that he had in uniform looked. So he told them, "Take off your pack, unpack it, now roll it up. You've got 30 seconds to do it, just as if we're going to go off on a forced march. And then pack it up quickly and go out on the march, load up your gear." They did that. And then when the final sculpture was reviewed, it was done by a general. And he said, he was asked, "Is that the way a pack should be packed to go off?" And he said, "No, that's not the way a pack should look. That's the way they did look in combat." So Krask was meticulous in following through to make sure the gear and representation was accurate.
Amazing again. That's a fantastic story. Who would know it? You're in Amesbury, you're looking at the Doughboy statue, and you have to know, behind the scenes, this sculptor really did do the research to give you an image that was accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way, which again was vouched for or validated by a general from the war as well. I love that. All right, good stories. Tell me more. You've got other photos you can look at that you showed at the library.
We've talked a lot about Leonard Krask's sculpture, and here in 1928 he did the George Washington DeLong. It wasn't long before the entire country was in the grips of the Depression. When that came along, there was no funding for large sculptures. He was one of the prominent sculptors in the United States, and all of a sudden hit an immense roadblock. There was
Tell-
no money for sculpture.
Now, 1931 is sort of the start of, maybe even middle of the Depression, and you've got a photo of that of him working in 1931 to show us. I know it's in the middle there. Yeah, it's a good one to use. 1931, number 23. Let's use that one, and you show us what you were talking about. He's trying to work, because that's what his profession now is. And I don't think it's any easier in the movies or on stage. But he's got this sculpture that he's working on.
No large memorials could be done. There just wasn't the money for it. But in the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles, there were a variety of what we think of as modern Olympic events, but there was also sculpture competition and artistic competition. And he created this little bronze sculpture of a New England figure skater, Maribel Vincent, who participated in the 1932 Olympics. He also learned at about age 50 to become a figure skater himself. And here you have a little clip from a Boston newspaper making fun of him as he became a figure skater himself. And he also made moving pictures back when moving pictures of figure skaters were new and innovative. He made moving pictures of figure skaters. And indeed, Maribel Vincent wrote a book about the art of figure skating. And she says Leonard Krask taught her how to do a particular ballet move, the Vincent spin, when he had her pose in a certain angle. And she creates Leonard Krask with being the inventor of the Vincent spin. And
so even though it's called the Vincent spin, it's really the Krask spin.
The Krask spin taught to Maribel Vincent.
He's got the credit, and it's because he had an ability with skating as well. Balance, fantastic. Of course, the little article that we looked at was about his being also a photographer, and you mentioned that in terms of his taking motion pictures of skating. When he's been around Gloucester long enough, did he take pictures of his own work? Did he take pictures of the man at the wheel? I think up above in there you can say he did. It's documented. Beautiful. Yeah. All right. I'm going to ask you to let us peek over the shoulder.
The one on the right is a picture of Leonard Krask photographing his man at the wheel.
You see how that is. This is the sculptor with his photograph, because he was a photographer, and he's doing what he can of his statue in what looks like an approaching or a moving storm because of those clouds, the dark clouds. And he found that was a day to go out, not a day to stay home. It was going to rain. No, get out there with your camera and take a picture. What are you going to take a picture of? That sculpture is in a dramatic context. You can frame it ideally.
Now, during the Depression era, there was not a market for sculpture. His principal occupation was becoming a lecturer. Now, if you bear in mind, he had this theatrical presence, stage presence, which he developed for 20 years as a professional actor. So he was very dramatic. He was very, very well spoken, and he was a marvelous photographer. I mean, he was regarded by Kodak, Eastman Kodak Company, as one of the preeminent color photographers in the United States when color photography was a new and emerging art. So he survived largely by giving lectures, which were, judging by all the newspaper clips that I've been able to recover, were widely received, well received, and he would do that and illustrate with dramatic slides, color slides, both of fishing in Gloucester, natural history things around Gloucester, and then later in his life, he traveled to Haiti and to Europe and to Europe and Egypt just before World War II. And he would became such a proficient lecturer that he was represented by lecture groups, professionally represented. He would travel around the United States providing these lectures illustrated with his own photography.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, he landed on his feet. And yet there's a story you told us that was only partly, it can only now partly be known or fragmentarily put together. It's like we have a puzzle and we only have 2 or 3 pieces. But you told us about it. And I'd like to at least conclude, because it's one of the more dramatic times in his life in Gloucester, and it reflects Gloucester. That, I think, relates to it, or the picture you show it and tell us more.
Well,
as much as can be known.
Okay. He was justifiably famous for having done The Man at the Wheel, and he decided early 1930s that he would like to do a companion piece, The Fisherman's Wife, which he called it. Here you see of course, the 1930s is bad timing because it's the Depression and there's no money. However, by the time of the 1940s, and people out there that are related to fishermen might know this, the 1940s, the war, was a boom time, great money, incoming money. The tide was high in fishing crews and captains and owners of boats in Gloucester. So there was money flowing into Gloucester by 1944. Tell us more. So he had come up with the idea, and then 1944, he went in, and if I read the read the newspaper articles correctly, the Fishermen's Institute loved his maquette, which is now on display at the Cape Ann Museum, although they're closed. Just before they closed, it was on display. That is there for viewing. He proposed to do that in a scale similar to the Fisherman's Memorial. Apparently, they all agreed. They said, this is a wonderful idea. Fishermen's wives should certainly be remembered. He went, and according to newspaper articles, made a full-scale clay model that would have been 10, 11 feet high, and then went back to the Fishermen's Institute. And for some reason that I have yet to understand completely, the sentiment changed. The Fishermen's Institute said, no, we're not going to fund this. And the newspaper article simply says he left that meeting in tears because there was accusations of fraud and manipulation and so forth.
Right. May I say, reading some of you kindly lent me the materials to look at, and I've come up with the, I wrote to the Fishermen's Union, which has merged with others, but they never got back to me. So I can't confirm this. But it seems like expenditures of large amounts of money, such as in this instance, I think he was offering to do the whole job of the casting and everything else and putting it in place and having it on the boulevard. I think the charge was $30,000. I think it was a high amount for anybody to look at. And the little group that got together in 1944, let's say there's 2,000 fishermen, 70 fishermen showed up for that meeting, the first meeting, which by popular acclaim was they wanted that done. Go ahead and do it to the sculptor. It was like unanimous amongst those people. They were not followed up by an equally uniform and happy group. When it was a larger amount of fishermen, a year or two later, when more progress had been made on this statue and there was to be a final vote, they didn't vote to go forward. They didn't vote to do it. And those bomb tossers that are always in every group stood up and said that he was I'll use a different term than fraud. He was gouging the fishermen. He was demanding $30,000 for something that should be $3,000. That kind of thing was. These figures were out of the air. There was not any effort by Leonard Krask to make a dollar. He was intent upon an ideal, realizing an ideal, and it costs a lot of money because there's a lot of people involved besides the sculptor. It's not just the sculptor; it's the casting and the bronze and the putting it in place and all those things. So here we have it. I'm speculating, surmising from materials that you have put together and found, but it's not the full story, and I don't think the full story will ever be exactly known, except what you said, which is that it was a dramatic moment in his life in which he left the meeting of fishermen who normally acclaimed him in tears because they were effectively throwing tomatoes at him at that.
One interesting thing is that the close to 15-foot high total sculpture was done in clay and stored in somewhere, presumably on Cape Ann, and forgotten. Whether it has been destroyed, hard to imagine that something that large and significant would be destroyed. It's also hard to imagine that it's still in a barn somewhere and undiscovered. But that's one of the interesting puzzles with Leonard Krask. It could be that there is a large full-scale model of the Fisherman's Wife existing somewhere yet to be found.
Yes, folks out there, we're going to look for them again. Folks out there, you look in the attic could be too small, but look in the cellar, look in the barn, look in the garage, the back of the garage, wherever there are, or somebody's storage, if they stored something in Lynn, Massachusetts, or whatever they did, find this sculpture of the Leonard Krask. What would it be, the material it was made of?
It would be clay.
Clay. Looking for a large, tall clay sculpture of a woman holding a child, essentially looking out at sea. It's the Fisherman's Wife Memorial, and it would be wonderful to rediscover that. And but you've gotten plenty already. We're in the last few minutes, and if you want to show us any other image, otherwise leave us with a profound thought or two about the life of Leonard Krask as you've been living it with him.
Well, Krask was a lot of fun, and as I look back in these newspaper articles, I was amazed. In the early 1930s, they had we'll call it artistic events. They would put on, one was done in Rockport, both the artists from Gloucester and Rockport. There was 1,000 people dressed up in costume. And Leonard Krask, having been in the theater many years, would appear as a George Washington or as some sort of a spectacular figure. But in this particular instance, 1,000 people dressed up in costumes. The band starts, plays till midnight, at which point there's a grand procession. There's 500 people watching this event in addition to the 1,000 in costume. Then after they take a break after the grand procession, the band plays till 3 o'clock. Then these people go out, dig clams, and have a beach party the next morning. And I'm saying to myself, either things are going on and I'm not invited in Gloucester, or perhaps we're not having as much fun nowadays as they did back even at the beginning of the Depression.
Well, great. And may I say, apparently produced and directed by Leonard Krask, a party, right? Effectively,
an immense party,
a costume party for artists and bohemians and groupies. Where did it take place? In Rockport?
That one was in Rockport. They've been in Gloucester as well. Okay. And he would be dressed up as a
magician or whatever.
Magician or whatever.
Yeah. No, wonderful. These are glimpses of the life of Leonard Krask that would be unavailable and unknown and still to this day, except for Jim Clark, who's borrowed away and dug up these things from long ago, often with images, and still pursues this. And we're encouraging folks out there to be expecting in the future that they'll have a chance to, the article that Jim wrote for Our People, Our Stories, he's expanding, and we'll come out with a book on Leonard Krask. I'm really pleased that he's met us at this juncture, and more can be done with public involvement in finding and discovering and knowing about Leonard Krask. If anybody out there has little stories or anecdotes that have been handed down, besides the facts and questions that we asked about, please feel free to contact Jim through the Studio 1623, because he's going to put together a book, and it's a way to preserve your usually ancestral stories, and even if it's folklore, sometimes it might be a letter, a Christmas card from Leonard Krask with a sketch. Who knows what you have out there? We're welcoming it, inviting it, and hope that there is such things to enlarge our understanding publicly of who Leonard Krask was, one of our giants of the time of the 20th century in Gloucester. Even though he wasn't born and raised in Gloucester, he certainly reflects Gloucester, just like the man at the wheel. Man at the wheel equals Gloucester equals Leonard Krask. Thank you, and until next time, we're signing off, and I'm thankful.
Thank you very much.
Jim Clark.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vepi, oho. Hän on neidosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vepi, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähtien